Welcome to Meet the Candidate with your host, Sue Lonnie Madsen. Meet the Candidate is your opportunity to see local candidates and hear about the experiences that have shaped their lives. Meet the Candidate is a nonpartisan community project brought to you by our friends at Greater Spokane Incorporated, Ponderosa Republican Women's Club, We Believe, We Vote, and Better Spokane. Now, here's Sue Lonnie.
Hey, welcome to Meet the Candidate. And my guest for this session is Tim Fitzgerald, who is running for Spokane County Clerk. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I always love talking about the clerk's office. It's my favorite thing to do.
Well, first I'm going to make you talk about yourself, because as a candidate, you have to introduce yourself to the voters, and we just start with the real basics of where did you grow up?
Well, that's a fair question. So my father was in the Army, so I was a military brat most of my life. And we traveled all around the country. I was actually born in Hawaii, but we lived in Virginia, Kentucky. We lived overseas in Germany. So I did a lot of traveling as a young man.
You know, it's funny, but I would have said, now that you say that, I would say that you have an Army accent.
A lot of folks say I have a New York accent.
Well, there's a different accent that kind of goes with each branch of the service, but for the military kids. But so they gave you education in a lot of different places.
It did. It always reminds me a lot of times. One of the reasons why I ran for public office is that I think sometimes Americans forget how good we have it. I've had the fortune of being in many good countries. I've had the unfortunate experience of being in Afghanistan and Iraq on combat tours. Mm-hmm. And I ended up doing 4 combat tours before I retired. You see a lot of the world that's like, wow, we don't know how good we have it sometimes. We just forget. And I think that's an important thing.
Did you enlist after high school, or did you do some college?
After high school, I went to Virginia Military Institute, VMI, on an ROTC scholarship. And then I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and I spent 30 years in the Marine Corps before I retired. Again, if a lot of folks talk about what's happening in our country, if these are the young men and women that are growing up in our country that will take over leadership in our country, these young men and women that I served with in our armed forces, we're in good hands. These are great, magnificent young men and women. So I did 30 years in the Marine Corps. I retired at the rank of colonel. I was very, very fortunate to be able to command from the platoon level up to squadron command, up to a task force command, both peacetime and combat. My initial skill set was flying helicopters. That's what I initially did. I flew helicopters off a ship. Very interesting life.
Well, that sounds very attractive to a young man.
Most of the time it was a blast, but just sometimes those dark nights looking for the ship. We'll post a stamp out there, and you're at 10,000 feet, and there's no land within 2,000 miles. You're like, what am I doing? But I loved that. And again, I ended up doing 4 combat tours: Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We did lose some fine young men and women over there. And just past weekend is a reminder of what the sacrifices are that Americans will make for this country.
Yeah, and for people who see this later on the web instead of live stream, you're speaking of just having passed Memorial Day.
Exactly,
weekend.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So some of the positions I had, I was a director of operations officer, what they call a G3, the general's operations officer. I had great bosses. I mean, it's kind of fun. Some of my bosses are well known. I had General John Kelly, who was the chief of staff right now at the White House. He was one of my commanding generals in Iraq. I had General Joe Dunford. He's now the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I had great leadership that I got a chance to be operations officers for. General Mark Reganis, he retired. I was his chief of staff for all NATO forces in southern Afghanistan in the Helmand province. And we had about a 43,000 person force, of which about 20,000, 15,000 were Afghan soldiers. And then we had British, we had Jordanians, Bahrainians, Estonians, obviously U.S. forces. It was very, very interesting learning a lot about the different countries and how they did business and how their militaries were trained.
You know, when I had an opportunity to visit in the Balkans, or in the Baltic states rather, we were visiting with some folks from Latvia who were very proud of having served with those forces and with their work with the U.S. Marine Corps. They
did. In fact, we had 2 Georgian of the old Soviet Union, country Georgia, 2 Georgian battalions serving with us. It was very different. It was very eye-opening. And you got a chance to go talk to them and just some of their traditions and their military ceremonies and stuff. It was really neat to see that.
Is there a particular conversation that sticks in your mind of something interesting you learned?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there's quite a few funny stories. When I served on a Marine Expeditionary Unit and we were sent into Kenya to help the Kenyan Armed Forces, I learned very quickly that the most dangerous animal in Africa is the hippopotamus. Mm-hmm. It kills more people than any other animal, so stay away from the hippopotamus. And they're very fast for the first 25 yards. We learned that firsthand. So I learned that lesson. Yes, so in the British Army, I had a staff of 10 primary, another 9 secondary, like chaplain, medical corps, public affairs. The primaries are administration, logistics, communications, combat engineering, obviously operations. As a chief, they all worked for me. The whole staff was 440 people. And again, we were directing about a 43,000 man person force. But I learned I had British officers on my staff. And what I learned is that you have the Royal Marines, the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, and the British Army. And I said one day, I said, yeah, I mean, the Royal British Army goes, we are not the Royal British Army. We are the British Army. The Marines and Navy and Air Force are royal. We are the British Army. So it goes back to history of way back when they had the rebellions and how so certain regiments that were faithful to the king retained the title royal. Those regiments that did not. So as a whole, it's the British Army, and they take great pride in that.
Interesting how that history.
Yes, and then of course we talk about how we are as sports fans. You know how we get very emotional about sports. Very quickly, when they watch rugby in the 5-country rugby tournament with Ireland, Wales, England, different ball game, completely different. They are more passionate about their rugby, even though you got Wales and England make up the United Kingdom. It's part of the United Kingdom. When they're playing against each other, it's like us watching the Raiders and Chargers or something, or the Mariners against the Yankees. They're just as passionate about the rugby sport as we are.
Well, so you separated from the service and landed in Spokane.
Absolutely.
And what drew you back into volunteering for public service and why the clerk's office?
Well, two quick things. So I think public service is one of the most noble things we can do. And serving the public, I think, is an honor. And it's a privilege. It's not a right, and it's not something that we get. I think it's an honor and privilege to serve the public because the public puts you in that position. And they expect certain standards and certain things for you to accomplish while you're in that job. And if you make promises to them, you need to keep those promises. So I think public service is very important. The Marine Corps taught me executive level management. As a chief of staff, people, processes, budgets, strategic thinking, relationships. Relationships are critical in the courthouse of all the agencies working together, the courts, myself, the prosecutor, public defender, pretrial services, detention services, the sheriff. We all work together for the same goals and the same successes. So it's got to be a team effort. Not everybody's an individual silo. So I think as a chief of staff, I learned how to handle all that kind of stuff. And the clerk's office, although it's an elected position, it is really executive level management. It's CEO-like business. I handle $1 million a month in public financial transactions, 11,200 customers. We have 169,575 legal records. I started out at 230,463 legal records being stored at taxpayers' expense. So we digitized all those records, made them digitized copies, and then got court permission to start destroying the duplicate paper records, as long as we could verify that the electronic record was correct and accurate. So it's that type of management that's critically important.
Okay. Well, we've come to that last question, which you get to answer with your speech directly to the voters, is how do you see the duties of this elected office, and why should voters choose you?
Okay, I can make this short. The clerk's office is the second busiest office in the entire county. County government, referring to county government. Again, you heard some of the numbers I gave you. Again, $1 million of financial transactions that we handle. We handle 8,000 sheets of paper. Modernization is critical, and that's what the clerk's office needs to do. And I promised I would modernize the office. Well, I did that. I got barcode scanning. We've installed debit and credit card transactions now. Previously, you could only do a cashier's check, a money order, or cash. Now we have debit and credit card capability for transactions, electronic stamp machines. So we're modernizing the office. We're going to implement a brand new case management system. That the current system is 40 years old. We're putting a new system in. Anybody who's ever dealt with a new electronic system of this scale and magnitude understands that this is executive level management. I bring those skills to the office. I know how to manage the people. I know how to work the paperwork. I know how to build the relationships. I understand planning and organizing and coordinating the efforts of different offices as we implement this computer process system. And I think that's terribly critical. I've also understand procedures, and we're creating a standard operating procedure. Clerk's office has never had a standard operating procedure on how you do business in each of the 5 departments. So I'm implementing that also. So I feel like I bring the executive level management skills that the office truly needs, especially this year.
All right. Well, Tim, I'm glad you could join us, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for watching Meet the Candidate. Spokane Talks thanks our community-minded partners, Greater Spokane Incorporated, the Ponderosa Republican Women's Club, We Believe We Vote, and Better Spokane for helping make Meet the Candidate possible.